Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Allison will be captured right after BTG returns next week, but the truth hidden beneath that short line is far more complicated, darker, and more layered than what any preview can ever suggest. The entire ordeal begins not with Allison's downfall, but with the suffocating atmosphere of obsession, isolation, and desperation that drives her every move. To understand why she would go so far as to abduct Chelsea, the celebrated young designer, one must step into the fractured mind of a woman who mistook admiration for possession, and passion for control. Allison's obsession with Chelsea had been festering for months. She followed every update, every photo, every whispered rumor online. Chelsea wasn't just a fashion designer to her, she was the embodiment of everything Allison felt she lacked in her own life: creativity, recognition, beauty, and most of all, a sense of belonging. Allison believed that by bringing Chelsea into her world, even by force, she could fix the gnawing emptiness inside her. This is where the story becomes dangerous, her adoration twisted into the conviction that Chelsea secretly belonged with her, that Chelsea's smile on stage, the gentle wave to the crowd, the interviews where she laughed, were all coded signals meant for Allison alone. When Chelsea went missing, the world saw another case of a rising star endangered by fame, but behind the headlines, her family collapsed into chaos. Danny clung tightly to Nicole, trying to hold her trembling hands steady, while Kat wrestled with her own guilt. She had always told Chelsea to be careful, that fans could become unpredictable, but neither of them imagined the level of danger waiting just outside the spotlight. Jacob, whose temper often overrode his sense of calm, insisted on leading the search himself, while Madison tried to balance compassion with focus, reminding everyone that fear would only blur their judgment. Meanwhile, inside the dimly lit house where Chelsea was kept, the young designer faced a horror she could barely process. Allison had handcuffed her to a heavy iron bed frame, surrounding her with the faint scent of mildew and the lingering chill of abandonment. The room wasn't a cell in the traditional sense, but its peeling wallpaper, cracked mirror, and scattered trinkets from Allison's past made it feel like a shrine and a trap all at once. At first, Chelsea tried reasoning with her captor, her voice steady, asking Allison what she wanted, why she had done this, and how she could let her go without making things worse. Allison only laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from Chelsea's cheek and whispering that she didn't need saving, she only needed to accept the truth that they were meant to be together. But Chelsea was no stranger to pressure. In the fashion world, she had survived impossible deadlines, brutal critics, and the kind of exhaustion that left her trembling backstage just before a show. Those experiences had honed her resilience, and now, in this far more dangerous situation, that same resilience became her anchor. When Allison, overwhelmed by her own delusion, demanded a kiss as proof of loyalty, Chelsea saw her chance. She feigned surrender, leaning forward, her hand brushing subtly against the small ring of keys on Allison's belt. Her heart pounded as she slid the key into her palm, hiding it with a steadiness that came from sheer willpower. The argument between them escalated quickly. Allison, sensing that Chelsea wasn't yielding, raised her voice, her words dripping with hurt and rage. Why can't you just see? Everything I've done these is for us. I'm the only one who understands you. Chelsea, however, refused to cower. You don't understand me. You don't own me. You've destroyed everything by believing a lie you built in your head. Her defiance cut through the tension like a blade, enraging Allison further. She brandished a knife, pressing the cold metal against Chelsea's wrist, but in that moment of reckless control, Chelsea's opportunity became clear. With a surge of courage, Chelsea unlocked the handcuffs and used the very chain Allison had bound her with to turn the tables. She looped the chain around Allison's neck, pulling with every ounce of strength, just enough to make Allison gasp and drop the knife without taking her life. The clatter of the blade on the wooden floor felt like the sound of fate shifting. Chelsea shoved her captor aside, ran to the door, and with trembling hands managed to slam it shut and lock it from the outside, trapping Allison in the nightmare she had built. For the first time in hours, Chelsea breathed free air. She stumbled into the night, barefoot, her hands raw from the cuffs, blood trailing down her arm where the knife had grazed her. The streets were empty, shadows stretching across cracked pavement, and her voice shook as she called for help. Every rustle of leaves, every echo of her footsteps felt like Allison's presence still pursuing her, but she pushed forward. When the headlights of a car appeared, she nearly collapsed with relief. Inside that car were Jacob, Kat, and Madison, who had been following a hunch, guided by fragments of information they pieced together. Moments earlier, Jacob had nearly collided with an oncoming truck, his hands trembling on the steering wheel, but Kat's sharp warning had saved them from disaster. That narrow escape had shaken him, but now all of that vanished when Madison screamed, "Stop the car!" "That's her!" Jacob slammed on the brakes, and in an instant, Chelsea was in Madison's arms. The reunion was raw, emotional, filled with sobs and laughter all at once. Madison held Chelsea tightly, feeling the sticky warmth of blood on her hands, and immediately began tending to her wound with whatever supplies they had. Jacob, snapping back into focus, grabbed his phone and contacted the authorities, his voice commanding, his words rapid-fire as he demanded immediate backup. He requested not only police but canine units, knowing that Allison, if she escaped, would not give up easily. His instincts were correct, obsession that deep does not dissolve overnight. Allison, even behind locked doors, would fight to maintain her twisted reality. Back at the family home, Danny and Nicole were waiting for news with every nerve frayed. The call finally came through. Kat's voice, heavy with exhaustion but alive with joy, broke the silence. "We found her. Chelsea's safe." Nicole dropped to her knees, while Danny pulled her close, whispering over and over, "It's over. She's safe. She's safe." Yet even as relief settled in, there lingered the haunting truth that Chelsea's ordeal was not simply about survival. It was about reclaiming her sense of self after being stripped of freedom, about facing the scars Allison had left, not just physical but psychological. And somewhere in the darkness, Allison's muffled screams echoed against the walls of the locked house, her reality collapsing, her world of obsession crumbling into fragments of desperation and rage. She had built an entire fantasy around Chelsea, only to watch it slip through her fingers in a matter of minutes. But obsession is never cleanly severed, it leaves remnants, dangerous embers that threaten to ignite again. That is the weight carried forward into the next chapter, where capture does not necessarily mean closure, and where Chelsea's fight is far from finished. The days following Allison's arrest were meant to bring calm, but for Chelsea, calm was an illusion. The physical wounds on her wrists healed quickly under Madison's care, but the marks on her mind lingered in ways she struggled to articulate. Each time she closed her eyes, she heard the faint sound of the cuffs clicking shut, or the strained whisper of Allison insisting they were meant to be together. Nights became fragmented into restless intervals, waking from shallow dreams drenched in sweat. Madison, sensing the weight of unspoken fears, rarely left her side, keeping close in silence when words would only fall flat. Jacob, meanwhile, buried himself in logistics. He coordinated closely with the local police, ensuring Allison's transport and custody were handled without mistakes. His tone was clipped, his patience razor-thin. He understood all too well that obsession didn't vanish with a pair of handcuffs. He pushed for constant surveillance, warning the officers not to underestimate Allison's resourcefulness. On the surface, it looked like diligence, but underneath lay his guilt. He couldn't shake the thought of how close he had come to wrecking the car that night, how 1 second of distraction could have cost Chelsea her rescue. Kat noticed his tension but chose not to press. Jacob was a man who only revealed his guilt through action, never words. Back at the family home, Danny became the quiet anchor. She stayed close to Nicole, who had withdrawn into herself after the ordeal. Nicole's relief had been immediate, yes, but it came with fragility. The moment Chelsea stepped through the door, Nicole hugged her fiercely, whispering promises that she would never let her out of sight again. Yet those promises were impossible to keep, and both sisters knew it. Chelsea's life, her work, her identity demanded independence. Danny understood the clash between love and control too well, and so she guided Nicole gently, reminding her that Chelsea's healing would not come from walls of protection but from freedom to breathe again. Allison, trapped now behind steel and concrete rather than in her decaying shrine of a house, refused to bend to reality. Interrogations revealed the depth of her delusion. She spoke of Chelsea as if she were already her partner, weaving stories where Chelsea had confessed her love in secret, where the world was simply too blind to see their bond. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether her words were madness or manipulation. The knife, the handcuffs, the bruises on Chelsea's arms, all of it was dismissed in Allison's narrative as misunderstandings, or worse, as acts of love. She smiled when speaking of the night Chelsea escaped, as though it had been a test, a game between them that proved their connection. Jacob pushed to attend one of these sessions, desperate to confront the woman who had turned their world upside down. The officers refused at first, but his persistence wore them down. When he entered the room, Allison's eyes lit up, not with fear but with recognition. "You're Chelsea's brother," she said with a slow grin, as though she had been expecting him all along. "She talks about you, you know. She told me you'd come." Jacob's fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. He didn't speak, only stared, the silence sharper than any insult. Allison tilted her head, studying him. "You don't need to be afraid. She belongs with me. You'll see in time." It took every ounce of restraint for Jacob to walk away without exploding, but inside, he was a storm. He had seen enough to know Allison's obsession wasn't over, it was merely caged. Meanwhile, Madison focused on Chelsea's recovery in more practical ways. She urged her to channel her trauma into her designs, believing that creation could serve as catharsis. Chelsea resisted at first, her sketchbook lying untouched on the desk, the pencil heavy in her hand. Each blank page seemed to accuse her of weakness. But one evening, after a long silence filled only with the sound of Madison brewing tea in the kitchen, Chelsea drew. The lines were jagged at first, angry, almost violent. Then they softened, curving into patterns that resembled chains breaking, keys hidden in plain sight. Madison noticed, quietly placing the tea beside her without interrupting, letting Chelsea's art speak for her. Cat, restless by nature, couldn't settle into waiting. She returned to the house where Chelsea had been held, walking the narrow halls with an officer by her side. She examined the clutter Allison had left behind, magazines with Chelsea's face circled in ink, scraps of fabric stolen from shows, notes scribbled with declarations of eternal love. To Cat, it was more than evidence, it was a warning. People like Allison didn't act alone in a vacuum. Obsession of this magnitude often connected to communities, online corners where fantasy blurred with reality. She urged Jacob to dig deeper, to trace Allison's contacts, fearing that others might share her delusions. Nicole, though quieter than the rest, struggled with her own role in the aftermath. She felt helpless, watching Chelsea's hands tremble when holding a glass, or seeing her flinch when someone approached too quickly. Nicole wanted to fix it, to erase the shadows in her sister's eyes, but every attempt felt clumsy. Danny stepped in, teaching her patience, reminding her that love wasn't about controlling outcomes but about presence. "Sometimes," Danny said, "the strongest thing you can do is simply sit in the silence and let it be enough." But silence didn't last long. Weeks into Allison's imprisonment, a chilling message reached Chelsea through an anonymous letter. The handwriting was careful, the tone disturbingly intimate. "You may think you've escaped, but we're always watching. You belong where you were meant to be." Chelsea's blood ran cold as she read it aloud to Madison, her voice breaking. Jacob reacted instantly, storming into the room, demanding to know where it had come from. The envelope carried no return address, no fingerprints, nothing that could be traced easily. For Kat, it was confirmation of her fears. Allison was not alone in her obsession. The family tightened their guard. Jacob doubled security measures around the house, installing cameras and ensuring a patrol car lingered nearby. Madison stayed even closer to Chelsea, refusing to let her walk alone. Danny organized the household with precision, balancing safety without suffocating Chelsea's fragile independence. Nicole became Chelsea's shadow, quieter but no less vigilant. Yet beneath the surface, tension cracked their bonds. They were united in love, but divided by fear of Allison, fear of the unseen, fear that Chelsea's nightmare was only beginning. In custody, Allison learned of the letter. When confronted, she smirked, refusing to confirm or deny her involvement. Instead, she whispered, "She'll come back to me. You can't stop destiny." Her words sent shivers through the officers, their skepticism eroding into dread. They began to realize that Allison's obsession had seeded something larger, something that might outlive her confinement. Chelsea, though shaken, found resolve growing within her. She refused to let Allison's shadow dictate her every move. With Madison's encouragement, she prepared to return to her work, hosting a small, private showcase of her latest designs. The event was heavily guarded, the guest list trimmed to the most trusted friends and colleagues, but for Chelsea, it was an act of defiance. Every stitch, every fold of fabric was a declaration that she was not broken, that her creativity could not be caged. The night of the showcase, the family gathered around her. Danny and Nicole stood at her side, offering strength in their quiet presence. Kat hovered nearby, watchful, scanning the crowd for any sign of danger. Jacob remained at the perimeter, speaking into his earpiece, coordinating with security. Madison, however, stayed closest, her hand occasionally brushing against Chelsea's as if to remind her she wasn't alone. When Chelsea stepped onto the small stage to thank her guests, her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke. "I was taken, I was silenced, but I am still here. And as long as I'm here, I will keep creating." The applause that followed was thunderous, but beneath it lingered unease. In the back of the room, an uninvited figure slipped away into the night before anyone noticed. The battle with Allison had ended, but the war with obsession was only beginning. The letter had been just the first triple. The family now faced the terrifying possibility that Chelsea was not merely the target of one woman's delusion, but the symbol of something larger, a fixation that others might carry forward. And as the night drew to a close, each of them understood in their own way that Allison's capture had not been the end. It had been the opening move in a much deeper game, one that threatened to consume them all if they weren't ready for what came next. Chelsea's showcase had been meant to reclaim her life, a moment of defiance against the shadow Allison cast. Yet as the weeks stretched on, the unease seeded by the anonymous letter refused to fade. At first it was subtly stranger, lingering a little too long outside her studio, an email with no sender name containing only a single word, "ours." Then came the second letter, slipped beneath the door while security guards swore they hadn't seen anyone approach. This one was more chilling. "She waits for you. We wait for you." Jacob exploded when he read it, demanding an immediate investigation into Allison's contacts, convinced that she had built a network of obsessives who clung to her delusions. Kat supported him, insisting that ignoring the threat would only give it room to grow. Madison and Danny argued for balance, reminding them that paranoia could smother Chelsea as much as danger could. Nicole stayed silent, but her eyes followed Chelsea everywhere, never letting her sister out of sight. Inside her cell, Allison seemed to sense the chaos her presence continued to create. During a scheduled psychological evaluation, she leaned close to the glass and murmured, "She'll come to me. Not because I take her, but because she needs me." The psychiatrist noted the remark, but it was Jacob who demanded the transcript, his fury boiling. He wanted her moved to a higher security facility, somewhere she couldn't send her words crawling out into the world like poison. But Chelsea was done with silence. For weeks, she had allowed fear to dictate the rhythm of her days. Yet something inside her shifted when she looked at her sketch as the broken chains, the shattered locks, the endless images of escape. She realized she couldn't keep running from Allison's shadow. She had to face it. One evening, she gathered the family together. Madison's hand instinctively found hers, while Danny placed a protective arm around Nicole's shoulders. Jacob and Kat stood apart, restless, both already expecting confrontation. "I need to see her," Chelsea said simply. The words landed like a spark in dry brush. Jacob immediately refused, slamming his palm against the table. "Absolutely not. You don't owe her a damn thing." Kat's voice joined his, sharp and protective. But Chelsea didn't flinch. "If I don't face her, she'll always own part of me. I won't give her that." Reluctantly, and only under strict supervision, the meeting was arranged. When Chelsea entered the sterile visiting room, Allison's eyes lit up with a twisted warmth. "You came," she whispered, as though the walls and guards didn't exist. I knew you would. Chelsea sat down across from her, hand steady, though her pulse raced. I came to tell you something, she said. Allison leaned forward, eager. You don't own me, Chelsea continued, her voice firm. You never did. You mistook obsession for love, control for devotion. What you did to me didn't bind you, it destroyed you. For a moment, Allison's smile faltered, her grip on her fantasy slipping. She shook her head violently, insisting, no, you feel it. I know you do. Chelsea didn't waver. What I feel is pity and relief, because when I leave this room, you'll still be here, and I'll still be free. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Allison's ragged breathing. For the first time, Chelsea saw not the predator who had stolen her freedom, but a woman hollowed out by her own illusions. Allison slammed her hands against the glass, shouting Chelsea's name, but Chelsea rose calmly and walked away without looking back. That act of defiance became the moment she finally reclaimed control. But the threat wasn't entirely gone. The so-called followers Allison had drawn to her cause still lingered in the shadows. Police traced the letters to an online forum where a small group obsessed over Chelsea with a fervor that mirrored Allison's. Jacob demanded their arrests, but the law couldn't punish words alone. Instead, Kat spearheaded a digital investigation, working with authorities to monitor the group's activity. Her vigilance kept them a step ahead, ensuring that obsession never escalated into action. For Chelsea, the healing process took shape not in fear but in creation. She designed a new collection titled Unbroken, unveiling it in a show that symbolized resilience. Each garment carried echoes of her ordeal, metallic accents resembling shattered chains, flowing fabrics that spoke of freedom reclaimed. The showcase wasn't just fashion, it was testimony. Madison stood proudly at her side, while Danny, Nicole, Kat, and Jacob watched from the front row, their presence a living reminder that she was never alone. In the months that followed, the letters stopped. The shadows around the studio thinned. Allison's influence, once stretching like a phantom hand, withered within the confines of her cell. She remained obsessed, certainly, but powerless. Her so-called followers fractured, their online murmurs fading when confronted with exposure. The family found its rhythm again. Danny and Nicole discovered peace in routine. Jacob softened once the adrenaline of crisis ebbed. Kat returned to her sharp humor, and Madison's quiet devotion anchored Chelsea's fragile but steady growth. The ordeal had scarred them all, yet it had also bound them closer, forging resilience through fire. One quiet evening, long after the storm had passed, Chelsea sat with her sketchbook open, Madison leaning against her shoulder. She sketched not chains, not keys, but open doors leading into light. Madison glanced at the page and smiled. So what's next? She asked. Chelsea closed the sketchbook and looked out at the night sky. Living, she said simply. Just living. And that's enough. Somewhere far away, behind reinforced walls, Allison whispered Chelsea's name into the dark, still convinced of a destiny only she believed in. But her voice no longer reached beyond those gates. For Chelsea and her family, the story no longer belonged to obsession, but to survival, healing, and the power to choose their own ending.